Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and with me today is my co-host, Janell Blue, who is president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society and also our sponsor. And today we've decided to talk about getting started in genealogy. And, it's not uncommon for us to have family members, tell stories. That's how I got started. My grandfather, my mother's father, told about his parents coming over from Scotland. And we get excited, and we today can get on the internet and start looking for people, and then we hit that brick wall of there's nothing more we can find. So we want to talk about methods that you really should be working on and using to be more effective in your research. So, Janell, where do we begin?
Well, thank you, Chuck. I began years ago. As soon as the databases started becoming available, I went online because it was so exciting to think that all of your information is in there. And so I threw in every surname that I had, and I just sort of randomly did a scatter shot, and I made some copies of some of the stuff I found, and some of it I didn't document where any of it came from. And so over a while, I got sort of tired and didn't really have a strategy, and so put it aside and really had to start all over again when I really did pick it up. So I guess what I want to talk about today is something that is really pretty logical if you think about it, but many of us in getting started don't really follow this method. And I think if you do, you'll begin to build a pretty solid research foundation, and that's what I want to talk about.
I got started before we had anything on the internet, before people really were using computers, and I have some of the similar problems. I didn't know about source citations, so I have a wife or a great uncle who I'd love to know where I found that wife, because later I found out he never married. And lots of other things where, gee, I wonder where I found that. So
I think that the first thing to do is, well, first of all, realize that each one of us is unique. Now, our name is not necessarily unique. Other people may have it. And my name, I thought my name was unique, but I found out there are other Janell Blues out there, especially when I was trying to set up, a web, email address. But so, and many people were born on my birthday, so that doesn't make me unique. Okay. But they don't all have the same parents I have. Their parents may have the same names as mine, but now we're beginning to get a little bit more unique. But then if you plug in all the children in the various levels, then and you put in a place and a time, you're beginning to really come up with a unique person. And so that's what genealogy is all about, is identifying those unique people. You got to do that through a lot of research and identification. One of the things I think we should begin with is going into the attic, going into all those boxes you've got piled up in the closet, find the documents that you already have done. By the way, take the research that you've already done. If you've been noodling around on a database of some sort, begin to put all that stuff together and write it down in a chronological way. Call your relatives. What do you have? I'll come over and help you go through that box. If you've already got an original baptismal certificate, you're a long way towards determining the approximate birth date of that person. And there's no need to keep, looking for the same kind of document. So put all that together, make a note in a chronological way of inventory what you've got so that you've got it, because that's a tool that you'll be able to refer back to many times. Also, you were talking about stories. find out about those family stories, because they have a kernel of truth to them. And you know, when I was a Girl Scout sitting around the campfire, we played this little exercise about, I'll whisper 4 things in your ear and you pass it along. By the time it got to that 10th person, it didn't sound very much like the original story. And so you think about that when you hear family stories. There's something in there. Usually the key words are in there somewhere, but many times they've been embellished to some degree, and so be careful with that.
And sometimes it depends on who the ancestor is. My grandfather, my mother's father, talked about his parents coming over from Scotland, and the only thing, when I got into genealogy, the only thing that I found that I couldn't document as correct was he always said his parents married the day his mother arrived in Philadelphia. His father had come over before she did, about 1.5 years, and that she came over and they were married in Philadelphia the day she got off the boat. Well, that wasn't true. She got off the boat the day before. And then there's my father's mother, who you can't believe anything she told us. So it is documenting those things. And you also point out a very good point. You know, looking at what you have, I went all the way to the National Archives regional branch up in Philadelphia to get my great-grandfather's naturalization record. Many years later, my mother had shared things that she had gotten from my grandfather over time, but it was kind of piecemeal. I'm looking through stuff after she had to go to an assisted living. I unroll this thing rolled up in a cardboard tube. It's his original naturalization certificate that she had upstairs.
Oh my gosh.
All those years, and I went and had to get it off of microfilm. So, you know, databases are filled with a lot of information, and you know, they're adding stuff every day, but what's a better way to do research?
So in terms of building this foundation, I guess the first thing you want to do is make sure that you're filling in all the blanks right away. After you've done the search of everything you've got, after you've inventoried that, go ahead and fill out a family tree. And I don't mean put it on a public website. I just mean, you know, you can use a template, you can draw it yourself, get a big poster board, put it on the wall. You can go into some of the databases like Ancestry or Family Search, but be careful about doing that, because if you're not sure of what you've got, other people are going to pick that up, and you don't want that to happen until you're sure. So be careful about that. But the point of doing this family tree early on is that you can use that as a tool, because now you know where, it's a map. You know where you need to go to fill in the holes. And like I said in the beginning, you are part of a family unit, not just you individually, unless you're doing DNA, and then you can sort of hone in on that. But even then, you still have to use, you know, the genealogy results with the DNA. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's really going to show you a map. And then when you get that, then choose a genealogical question. And my guess is that you're not going to have enough information at this point to have that question, who was my great-grandfather's father? That may be a little bit too far up the ladder, but let's just narrow it down to something as straightforward as who is a certain person, or when was a certain person born, or where did they immigrate from, those kind of things. Don't just have a question that says, tell me all you can about my ancestor.
Yes.
Because that's a scattershot. You're going to get all kinds of stuff. And you want it to be very focused.
And you're not going to necessarily have enough information that if you find some of those answers when you ask those general questions, that you know whether it's actually accurate or not. I mean, one of the problems that I find, and I'm sure you find the same thing, and I tell people, just because it's on the internet, just because your distant cousin or even your cousin or sibling may have put it up, doesn't always mean that the family trees that are up on the internet are correct. We still have to evaluate them to be sure that they are accurate in what they're putting up there, because there are some people that really don't care whether it's accurate or not. If it's a good story, let's put it up and hold on to it.
Okay, so now we've got the family tree. Now we've decided that we're going to try to find some information on a particular individual. I will tell you that, just stepping aside a little bit, I will tell you that if you go ahead and do the DNA now, that gives you some time to begin to get the results back and begin to work through some of those cousin matches. And I mean, the best part about the DNA tests for me is not the ethnicity. It's really those cousins, and I've had some success with that. In fact, I didn't. The 1850 census is the only place where my great-grandfather's siblings were named, but those names were really weird, and I never could figure out what they were. They weren't names that you would expect from a German family who had just immigrated, and I never knew who his siblings were. And it wasn't until I found that fourth cousin who said, "Oh yeah, his sister was my great-grandmother," and she had information, and that filled in a blank for me. So there's some value in doing DNA early on, but you can't do DNA without also doing the other research.
Had they Americanized the names, or
I have no idea, because that's what you usually think, is that maybe the census taker didn't hear it well.
And that could be too.
Or maybe those were German nicknames of some sort, endearing names of some sort. I don't know. But we were able to pretty much match up 3 out of 4 of them. So, okay, so now we've got a foundation. We've got all the information that we can. We've inventoried it. We've put it into a family tree, and we have a genealogical question. So now let's go to the database. Now we can go online and begin to fill in those blanks on, who were Daddy's siblings. Let's get that information. You might say, well, I don't really care about that. I want to get on to the good stuff. You need to have that first, because then you've got that foundation that's going to give you corroborating information along the way, and also maybe additional information that you didn't even think about.
Yeah, because you just never know what you're going to find in a record. Surprisingly, I always tell people, once you've gathered the information that that family members know, and then you hit the census as the next step, because that's going to help to confirm in some cases what you have. It's going to give you clues for other things, and I tell people, you want to, with the census, make sure that you do every one of them, because you never know who's going to be in the household or where somebody may turn up. I had a great aunt, my grandmother's sister, who married her first husband, and I knew she was divorced. And I knew her second husband. I didn't know her first husband, but I did the census as each census came out and was available. And in 1920, she was living with that first husband in Philadelphia. The 1930 census, when I looked for her, the only person with that name was not in Philadelphia, but over in New Jersey, living with, when I looked at the relationship, a cousin, and I knew nothing about this cousin. If I hadn't found her with this cousin, I don't know when I would have discovered them, but that opened up a new branch, and then by 1940, she was married to her second husband and back in Philadelphia. But it's important, and I always say, particularly when the husband dies, or sometimes the wife, you never know who the wife or the husband is going to go live with the children, and what you might find there.
So that's another
That's
reason then why it's important to fill in all of those blanks.
Those blanks, yes.
And of course, the
Yes.
next step is just vitals. I mean, you really
Yes.
want, when you're filling in those blanks, you want the vitals. You want birth, death, marriage at the very minimum. And you can get that, many times you can get it online, but not always.
Always. Well, and of course there too, I use the census as a stepping stone to, we have only the 1900 that gives us a month and a year, but taking the age, subtracting it from the census year, gives us a starting year, because as we know, sometimes people age 10 years and sometimes they age unusual numbers of years. I had one couple that in 30 years, he aged 26 years and she aged 54.
Wow.
and
That's
my
a miracle.
My first thought was, something's wrong here. Maybe, although I couldn't imagine him marrying a woman that much older, but I thought maybe he has had his first wife die and he married another woman of the same name. And no, that wasn't the case. But also using the marriage information again, if they're married or they're widowed or they're divorced, there's marriage information. And some of the later censuses, the 20th century, do give us some clues as to when to start looking. They'll give age when the person was first married or the number of years in that current marriage. So that, again, is quite helpful coming out of the census.
Census are a wealth of information depending on what year it is. And in one of our other sessions, we had a whole discussion about the non-population records that are part of the census. And that's also very useful. So in terms of having some clues, though, Find a Grave will give you some clues. If you're struggling with that death date or you're not sure where they're located,
Yes.
be careful with that, because the information is provided by individuals.
Yes.
And there's no monitor on the quality control.
Yes.
So, but I have found, in one case, I found some information on a Find a Grave for my ancestor, and I really didn't know some information that I was looking for. So I actually connected with that person, and you can do that because there's an email there.
Just to clarify, so in case people don't know, Find a Grave is a free website. If you Google Find a Grave, up it will come, and it's all cemeteries. It's divided up by state and then by county, and there are also some in foreign countries. And you can do searches various ways. So go to Find a Grave and look at the ways you can look for people. But it's all people contributing information. So you may find that your ancestors aren't there and you can contribute. But I have had a number of cases where I have found somebody else put the information in and I used the contact and found this is a distant cousin. One case, I found a distant cousin who still insists that our mutual great-grandfather, second great for me and third for her, was a Civil War veteran, and I have proven to her that it's not him, it's his son with the same name by getting the pension file. But it was great information because I didn't know a whole lot about the family. And she had particularly, this is my great-grandmother's father, and she descended from one of his other daughters. And so I had or got from her a lot of information. I have to verify all of it because she's got lots of mistakes in it, but it is definitely a way of getting clues to lead you to things.
The other thing is online trees. And here again, you have to be careful. And if you go in and you see that there's many different trees that have the same name, then really look for the one that's got the most documentation. And then, especially if it's an original document, then you can connect with that, the supplier of that, the manager of that tree, and find out more, because often that will pay dividends. But there's no real value in taking what you see on a tree without any further research and duplicating it. That we don't need any more of those.
And one of the things that I have found is you will look at trees and you'll see something, and particularly if you know it's a mistake, and you look at other trees and basically they have the same thing as that incorrect tree, and that's all that they have. That's all that they have. And it has amazed me the number of times that I've found a tree with basically very little information on it. It's wrong, and yet on that website, whichever one you're using, Ancestry, Family Search, whatever, if they just did some basic search on there, they'd come up with so much more that they could put on the tree. And they know that it was at least had a record. Whether the record was 100% correct or not, it's another story. But they at least have a record that they can get information and start filling the tree in with.
So that is the beginning. I mean, if you use that methodology and you're filling in those little blanks with what you can find on the database, now the topic for another one of these tapings is to talk about everything else that's out there in the world, because you probably aren't going to find enough information online to be able to prove out all of these relationships up the line. Right. And so there's going to be a whole lot more work, but at least you've begun to get some fundamentals and get that foundation. One of the tenets of good genealogy is reasonably exhaustive research. And many people ask what the definition of that is, and most researchers will say, well, it depends, which is a frustrating answer, but it's true. And a lot of it depends on the quality of the documentation you already have. Is it original? Is it a copy? A census is dependent on who gave that information. And so I guess the answer is it depends on the quality of what you already have.
Well, one of the things that I tell people when they ask that question about that aspect of the proof standard is, it's looking at anything that you can get record-wise, because you can have 15 records and 3/4 of them tell you one thing and a few others tell you something different, and then there's that one that actually has the information. So I always tell people, when you find a new record, you want to compare it with what you already have and evaluate it. But people also get hung up on the fact that they don't always have access to records, and so it should be an exhaustive search, but I can't get a hold of this. And I tell them, we realize that there are restrictions on records. Classic example, you can't look at a census record until it's 72 years old. So we're all waiting for 2022 for the 1950 census. So that is something that you have no control over. Vital records are restricted, other records are restricted, and also you have losses of records. Records go and disappear for whatever reason, or destroyed, whether it's on purpose or whether it's accidental. I was looking for a deed book out in the Fairfax County archives for the courthouse, and lo and behold, somewhere along the way, that deed book grew little feet and walked out of the courthouse and disappeared, and so it wasn't available for me to look at. So those things, we realize they're problems. We just deal with them.
But don't be reluctant to go to the courthouse.
Oh, no.
Because there's all kinds of good stuff there, and you may have to figure out how to maneuver through it. But man, once you get there, it can be a wealth of information.
Yes.
And that's sort of the next step. After you've done all you can do online, then begin that process and go to those counties where you think they lived and look for wills and deeds and other things that will tell you more than just meets and bounds. It may tell you a relationship that will help to corroborate a lot of the information that you already have.
Well, and in some cases, particularly marriage records, many counties kept marriage records even into colonial times at the county level, long before they're going to be available at the state level. So those records are important. And also looking at what do they have on the website, but go in and ask, what else do you have in a courthouse? Because they often have things that may be small pockets. There were only records for a few years, but your ancestor was there and is in them, but it's not a big enough set of records that they put it up on a website for you to know it's there.
Find out if there's local historical societies, look at newspapers, all those things will help. And by the way, join your local genealogical society, because at Mount Vernon, for instance, we have monthly meetings where there's a presenter who talks about specific topics that, we just scratched the surface here today. Every one of these things deserves a lot more discussion, but a genealogy group will be able to do that. They also have little training sessions, special interest groups. And you get to be around other people who are researching too, and you can share your story, get ideas from them. It's a wonderful thing, and at Mount Vernon, it's a very affordable thing too. So whether it's Mount Vernon, whether it's Fairfax County, find a genealogical society and join, because that will really help you.
And in both cases, people often think, well, they're doing Virginia, they're doing Fairfax. No, most of the members don't have Virginia or Fairfax ancestors. So the programs and the topics are, for the most part, general, that are going to apply to anybody doing research anywhere in the country. So we've basically just with this scratched the surface, but our purpose was to really get people who weren't sure how to start started down the right road.